He's an amazing person. And if you spend any time with him, you'll understand why. And so what usually is, he has charge of the program that he's going to do. And tonight, it's a little different because Diane and Rosie have charge of the program, and we're going to grill Mr. Hardy. So it's going to be quite interesting because not only does he have great knowledge, but he's also has great wit. So be prepared. Diane, ask him some questions.
Okay. I know that you grew up here in this town and spent a lot of time out in the woods. But talk about that. Tell us about what you did as a kid when you were out wandering around in the woods.
Yeah. Well, there were, in addition to what Lincolnville has that sort of anybody can access nowadays, I had a few other head starts. One was at the house I mostly grew up in, backed up against the state park. So we had a really big backyard, however many 15,000 acres or whatever it is. The other thing that was really nice is because my family has been around for a few generations, they had a toehold on McGonagall Lake. Specifically, it was a camp that my grandfather built when he was 18 years old on an acre of land that his father gave him, or I guess maybe his grandmother gave it to him. She would have been a young, but anyway, he had an acre of land right on the Fernals Neck Road, the first place on the water as you drive down that, and that was fair game all summer long. Of course, Sunset Cove, for those of you old enough to remember Sunset Cove, was also part of my orbit, and that was a very good place to be a kid. So if you're a kid and you have access to a boat and you have a bicycle and you have your own 2 feet and you have permission to use any of those things while your parents are away at work, you can learn to entertain yourself quite easily and have a very good time. And I guess I should mention too, like all kids, you pay a lot of attention to what your father does, like all sons do. And my father and his cousin Billy Chalmers, who lived on Fernals Neck Road, were big on hunting and fishing. So as a kid, I really was interested in those things as well. And that gives you all the more reason to get out and ramble around in the woods. So that was the start of it all, was just finding out how much fun you could have without any peer group around you, but just your own 5 senses and the freedom to ramble around in nice country like this.
So you've made quite a career or done quite a few things with the first people to be here. And so what sparked your interest? How did you get into doing what you do with Native Americans?
Yeah. It started because, like Rosie, I have this addiction for finding out the story behind old roads that you find out in the woods. And that's a very slippery slope, as he could tell you, or as anyone else who does it can tell you, because they go back a long ways. A road is kind of a one-way phenomenon. Once you make a trail, especially through woods, but once you create a trail, they only tend to grow. And so I'll give you an example. Most of the roads in Maine, most of the old roads in Maine, and you can tell when you're on an old road because you look and there's almost no cut banks on either side of the road. There may be about an 18-inch high gravel ribbon that the road sits on, but the sides of the road are at grade. So that's one of the ways you know you're on an old road. But anyway, let's say when Native Americans were here and needed to get cross lots, you were okay until you came to a river, and there's quite a few of them in the mid-coast here. And to get across that river, you probably had to know where the beaver dams were. Well, so that same trail, crossing Duck Trap on a beaver dam, and then continuing on, let's say that the trail continued all the way to the trading post on the Kennebec at Cushnock, which we call Augusta now. You might have had to cross 5 rivers and use beaver dams. Well, that trail became a path that white settlers used. And once the houses start springing up along a trail, especially where two trails cross, that's a Native American Lenape word for trading post. Actually, the etymology of it means where two paths cross. You know, so that trade happens, and once the houses and stores start springing up, you're sort of stuck with that path becoming a road. So all these old roads out in the woods that we find pieces of here in Lincolnville that don't make any sense when you look at them through modern eyes. When you start playing detective and you just sort of do the road thinking, which boils down basically to what was point A, what was point B, and why was this the most convenient way to get from one to the other. A good example is here at Duck Trap and Youngtown Road. Now, if you go from the top of the hill at Duck Trap and turn onto Duck Trap Road, and then follow that up, and it brings you out on 173, and then you get to Stevens Corner, and if you're really looking close, you'll see the old road going straight as an arrow through the woods, right through the parking lot where the hikers park at Stevens Corner, and then it continues on and is Youngtown Road and goes right in a beeline to the head of McGonagall Lake. So to figure out a road like that, then you start saying, okay, point A was probably Duck Trap, and Duck Trap was quite a lively joint in 1800, or 1802, and but there was a reason that somebody needed to have a road that went straight from Duck Trap to the head of McGonagall Lake, and so figuring stuff like that out draws you into it. And as I did that, I realized that these roads were older than any of the white settler reasons I could come up with to explain what point A and point B was. And that was what got me going on Native American stuff, and realizing that I had to know where their paths went and why they went where they went. And that led me to about a 2-year side trip into deciphering the language so that I could sort out what place names meant, because their place names told you a lot about how they used a spot.
And speaking of that, just for a second, while you're on that, could you pronounce that for us, please, and tell us what it means, by any chance?
Well, okay, so he's got Magwintagwak written down here, and that's just one of 1,000 different versions you see of Maguntacook, Neguntacook. He's got Magwintagwak here, and if you read John Smith in 1614, when he sailed along the coast of Maine, he said this is place where the native people here are hiding from the Taratines, their big bad eastern neighbor tribe, and they hide behind a mountain against whose feet the ocean pounds. And he describes very clearly Mount Batty and Mount McGonagall. And so this was an important place, and he calls it Macatacut. And if you break Macatacut down, you get something like possibly the river with the big eel run. That's one possibility. Magwintagwak, which I don't put much stock in, but Fanny Hardy X Storm, I think, recorded that version, and translated it, or her Penobscot informants translated it as place of great sea swells. But that's a bit of a stretch, and I
And
don't.
what did we come up with, Sheree?
Choppy seas.
Choppy seas.
Yeah.
It's
And
it's from the Penobscot map.
yes. I
Specifically Lincolnville Beach.
yeah. No, and that a name like that makes sense. What's tricky is when, you know, they could well have referred to this stretch of the coast, and as basically being a place to avoid, you know, because of the fetch that the wind gets here. But I don't think it's the same translation. I don't think it's the same place name as Maguntacook. You know, it's unfortunate that they're so close, because some people have said that. Speaking of Fanny Hardy Ekstrom, who recorded that,
And who is she?
oh well, she was the daughter of a trapper named Manly Hardy, who lived in Brewer, I think, back in the 1800s, and he was great friends with the Penobscots. Traded with them for furs, and she grew up having, you know, Native Americans visiting her house and trading with her father, and took an interest in the language. Anyway, one of the really interesting things in her book was when she said a lot of these place names in the mid-coast, from Pemaquid to Maguntacook, a lot of these places, and even the name Penobscot, and I did this myself, she said, names that my Penobscot informants struggle to translate are easily translated by my Micmac and Maliseet informants. And that tells you something about the fact that they weren't static. They didn't just have a fixed homeland that they had always been in. As soon as the Micmacs and Maliseets got French muskets in their hands in about 1607, they marched right down the coast to settle scores with the guys in Camden and killed the headman there and all his key people. And then they kept going all the way down to Lynn, Massachusetts, and did the same thing to the Sagamore there, settling an old score. And by the time the white settlers came to Lincolnville in 1769, Micmacs and Maliseets were present in the mid-coast. I'm not saying that there weren't Penobscots too, but there's so much history that we don't know. And if you ask a Penobscot person, why do they call the river Penobscot? They'll give you a great long thing like Banawapskak, and it means where the ledges widen out. And if you ask a Maliseet person to translate Penobscot, they'll just say the rocky place. And that's when you first Penobsk in Maliseet is rock, kind of an egg or potato shaped rock. That's all it is. And I met a Maliseet woman, a language specialist who was native Maliseet, and I said, I don't think Penobscot's Banawapskak. I said, I think it's this, and I held out an egg-shaped rock, and she said, Penobsk. And the et just is what they call a locative. It means at the place. So at the place of egg-shaped rocks. So again, the Penobscots, a big part of Penobscot culture is Abenaki and came here from northwestern New England. That's about half of the Penobscot bloodline. The other half is indigenous coastal groups who were all through this area. But anyway, I do go on about
You
names.
do go on. Okay, I got another question. I remember you saying that there were inland canoe trails. That it was, you know, we think of the tribes coming down in the summer and being on the shore, and we've had some archaeological discoveries along north of Duck Trap. Harper Mitchell did some digs. But what about the inland, the lakes and how they travel inland?
Yeah, so you know, the birch bark canoe is not that old. a contrivance, but I mean, it's been around 1,000 years, let's say, in this part of the world. And before that, a lot of their boat travel was in dugout boats. In fact, a word you see all through Algonquian languages is kind of like ulak or ulak.
Could you explain more on the dugout, what they used?
Well, and it means hollowed tree. Ulak means that. When the Europeans came, their ships were called Mishulak, which Misha means big. So big hollowed out tree. But yes, a dugout boat was as round as the tree was round. And you, I'll be polite here and say you had to sneeze straight ahead if you were going to sneeze in a dugout boat, or they'd go over. So coastal travel in the winter was a kind of a dicey proposition. A birch bark canoe is no picnic, but it was better. But for traveling inland, the birch bark canoe that you can carry yourself, and that you can, you would think if you've ever tried to paddle a canoe against the current, you would think, oh, they must have been miserable. It must have taken them forever. But the answer is they didn't paddle upstream. They had two people using setting poles, and one would pole ahead and reach the end of the pole and would hold it, and then the other one would reach ahead. The one in the front would reach ahead, and he would pole, and so you would alternate poling your way against the current. And you'd go as far as you could before you ran out of water, and then you'd pick up the boat and transfer it to the next watershed. And if you look at a place like northern New Hampshire, say Coos County, New Hampshire, where within a span of about 3 miles, you're at the headwater of the Androscoggin, the Connecticut, and the river, Sorrel. I'm not sure which river it is, but one that goes into the St. Lawrence. Anyways, you find these spots where with just a couple miles travel, you can go down rivers that have mouths, that are 50 or 100 miles apart.
So they could travel here in Lincolnville?
Yeah, they could, but again, I don't put a lot of stock in it for pre-contact times, because there was no urgency in pre-contact times. They had their yearly survival totally figured out. If the hunting was bad, you knew you could always, get clams and mussels at the seashore, and you knew about February you could get smelts at the seashore. And from smelt season on, a big part of what you would be eating for your protein was eggs, whether it was fish eggs, in smelts, or out of alewives or shad or whatever, or seabird eggs, which when you would paddle out to a ledge that was home to 200 nesting cormorants, and fill your canoe with cormorant eggs, that's a lot of sort of perfect food. And the other thing is, you could wait for the weather to suit your purposes. And I'll add, because even though, yes, there are times when it's pretty darn choppy in West Penobscot Bay, there's also a lot of times at daybreak and at twilight when it's as smooth as a mill pond, and you could travel when it suited you. But the last thing about ocean travel, I'll say, is that even with a big dugout boat with 10, 15 people in it, when I worked on Vinyl Haven, I was intrigued by Seal Island, because it's 8-10 miles out off Vinyl Haven. Like 1,000 gray seals will be on it this time of year, having their young. Okay, so you've got unlimited fat, fur, and protein waiting out there, and it's trapped up on the island. It can't make its way into the water. And if you ever see these big spear points and wonder why did they want to throw such a big spear point at something, one answer is you didn't have to throw it very far to get a seal. You walked up to it and gave it one of these. And if you've ever looked at the artifacts from the red paint people grave sites along the coast of Maine, they had slate bayonets that might be this long, you know, great long slender things. And archaeologists say, well, those are ceremonial. They didn't really have any functional use. But when you're trying to kill a 600 or 700 pound bull gray seal, a 10-foot pole with about an 18-inch slate bayonet on the end of it would be a wonderful thing to just slide between its ribs, pop those pink balloons, and then you've got 600 pounds of protein. And to get out to that island, yes, it would be hazardous in one dugout boat, but what if you took two dugout boats side by side and put a pole across them fore and aft? Suddenly you've got something very stable, and you've got two poles that you can tie off seal carcasses to and come back to the main island of Vinyl Haven or Isle of Ho, or even to the mainland, you know. So just picking your morning when you like the weather, even in the dead of winter and even in dugout boats, they had that stuff figured out, I believe.
So, tell us a little bit about housing. What were their encampments like? What would the encampment been like here in, we'll say, 1700, early 1700s? Here.
Okay. Well, by then things had really been messed up by the newcomers, and so more defensive compounds were needed.
And what do we call those? Defensive.
Well, they'd have a palisaded village, among other things. Now, the native populations here were already gone. The Sheepscot Indians, you know, you hear the word Wawanoks bandied around. That name isn't from a place here. That's from the place they went up to Canada. But once the English started putting bounties on Penobscot and Maliseet and Abenaki scalps, Canada looked pretty good. It's sort of like being an 18-year-old when I was. Canada looked like a good option. So there weren't many here in 1700. We killed them, whether intentionally or with disease, and threatened them enough so that they were mostly moved out. But prior to that, there were two different kinds of structures. One was a family structure made of arched saplings covered with bark or mats. Could be cattail mats. But that was a one family deal. When winter came, the kind of snow load you would have gotten back then, that structure would not have been appropriate. And so the more traditional cone-shaped with two layers of birch poles. So if you picture a skeleton of about 20, not birch, I'm sorry, 20, black spruce was one of the favorite woods for it, but 20 spruce poles making a cone, birch bark wrapped around that, and then poles laid on the outside of the birch bark. And of course the birch bark would have been stitched together too, but the two layers of poles held the thing in the wind, and the cone shape would shed the snow, and you'd have favorite camping places where there were probably poles left behind. When you moved, let's say you moved from the good life down on the shore in September and October, but you wanted to go inland and do some hunting and trapping, and for that you needed deep snow. So you would roll up your birch barks, probably leave the poles here and head to a campsite inland where you knew the hunting and trapping was going to be good. And there were probably poles already waiting for you there. And if there weren't, it wasn't a big deal to make some new ones.
Diane?
I have another question.
Not right now. I'm thinking.
So we hear longhouses,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah, those were not unknown to the Algonquian people. We mostly
Wait, when you
associate.
say Algonquin, that's the same as the Wabanaki?
Yes, yes.
That's-
So when you hear that word, there's two things you might hear. You might hear Algonquin or Algonquin, or you might hear Algonquian. Algonquian refers to a language, and it's all the same language from the Carolinas to the Arctic Circle to the Mississippi River. That's the donut. The hole in the middle of the donut was the Iroquois, which was the five nations you sometimes hear, which were Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. And that was the heart of the Iroquois people, but Susquehannas were Iroquois too. Anyway, they kind of occupied this central area. They were really held under the thumb of these Algonquian speakers all around them until the Dutch came, set up shop at Albany, and traded the Five Nations all the muskets they wanted for beaver furs. And once they had muskets and their longtime enemies, the Algonquians, didn't have as many, the Five Nations quickly flourished. One of the reasons they flourished is because when they would defeat somebody, the women and children would be taken as prisoners, treated very well, and incorporated into their own ranks. So they built up their population through warfare. The Dutch and then the English succeeding them in New York in 1664 really only made it here because of their alliance with the Five Nations. Starting as early as about 1618, the Five Nations put down the uprising as a result of Kieft's War in New Amsterdam in 1643. The Five Nations put down King Philip's War and helped the Dutch and English win that. The Native Americans, Five Nations and some Algonquians, but mostly the Five Nations, allowed the English to win what we call the French and Indian War. I doubt that that's what the French and Indians call it. I prefer to call it the 7 Years' War.
How was this area affected by what the French and Indian War?
Oh yes. Oh, definitely.
How? Right here? I mean, right here in.
Yeah.
Lincoln?
So the French based in Quebec, but also with a very strong outpost right here in Castine, Baron Castine, who was married to a Native American woman and had tremendous influence with all of the main indigenous people. They sided with the French. The Five Nations sided with the English. The Sir William Johnson, who was in charge of Indian affairs for the King of England, one of his letters back home said this whole question between us and the French will the best cards we can have in our hand will be the Indians, and whoever holds the most of those cards will win this battle between the French and the English for North America. And the Five Nations, the Iroquois people, were the ones who the English had, and so all of the tribes up here fought on the side of the French. If you ever watch the movie The Last of the Mohicans, you'll see the attack on Fort William Henry. There were Abenakis present at that, fighting on the side of the French. So all of the wars that the English basically agitated between Native American groups after 1600, this long-standing enmity between the Five Nations of Iroquois and the Algonquians around them, the English played that to their advantage time and time again, and it really wound up in the decimation of these northern Algonquian tribes, to the point where I mentioned Fanny Hardy earlier. She remembers as a child Penobscot men coming to her father and asking if they could borrow some money because the Mohawks were coming up to collect their annual tribute payment from the Penobscots. And they had to have this tribute money or there were gonna be some heads knocked. And this was in the late 1800s that this was still going on. So it cast a long shadow.
When do you think, we have very few stories that come down. Once in a while, someone mentions some story about an Indian here. And I'm wondering, there were people coming through still? I mean, when were people still living here?
There were.
During
yes.
the time of settlement?
Yes. And if you read a book called Penobscot Man by Frank Speck, he shows the different Penobscot family territories in the whole Penobscot drainage. And as you got down the shore here at the mouth of the river towards Northport, Lincolnville, and all the way down to Owl's Head, it was the Mitchell family.
I was gonna say.
Which they were also called the Lobster Mitchell family, because there's a Bear Mitchell family and a Lobster Mitchell family. The families that had maritime creatures as their totems are sort of the old people. So the Lobster Mitchell family is a very old coastal Penobscot group.
Kerry,
they were here.
I want to mention a couple of other things, and then I want to open it up for questions from the audience. But you have a book out. You want to just shortly highlight that a little bit?
Well,
tell people.
that one's in the rearview mirror, but that came out in 2009. But the funny thing is, it's been discovered. I don't know who and I don't know how, because I think the day it came out, Down East canceled their whole promotion division, or the timing was about like that.
I never had one.
No. But anyway, I think through some good word of mouth, it has kind of stayed around, and it's kind of fun. Just today, the mail contained $100 royalty check. but so you can still find it. It's called Notes on a Lost Flute. Oh, look, there it is. But
And what's the thing that's in the mirror that's not in the mirror now? What's in the windshield?
Yes. What's coming is a book that I hope is going to be called Gainful Pillage. And that's this book about the mouth of the Hudson, where I've been studying for the last 5 or 6 years. 10 times the project that my main book was. That phrase, gainful pillage, was, if you've ever studied Massachusetts history, and old John Winthrop, who was the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and just about pure evil, religious kook. Anyway, his brother-in-law was a guy named Emmanuel Downing, and there was a letter written from Downing to Winthrop in 1645. This is 7 or 8 years after they've killed the Pequots in the 1637 Pequot massacre. And in 1645, Downing, Winthrop's brother-in-law, writes to him and says, now what we need is a just war against the Narragansetts, because if we do that, we'll get enough men, women, and children to send as slaves to the sugar plantations in the Barbados. We'll trade them for blacks and bring the blacks up here, because they won't try to run away the way the Indians would. And just to sweeten the deal, we can backhaul salt along with the blacks, and that'll pay most of the cost of the voyage. The reason we need these slaves is that, excuse me, 1645, Winthrop's batch came over in 1631, and it was about a 7-year indenture. That was the common thing on English servants. There was so much available, empty land here. Once a servant's indenture was over, there was no way they were going to remain a servant. They were going to get a piece of land, whether they squatted on it or paid nothing for it, just about. They were going to trade with Indians, fish, build boats, whatever. So Downing is saying to Winthrop, this second batch of servants is just about up, and we aren't going to have any servants. None of them are going to work for the wages. He said to Winthrop, I'm pretty sure you know we can main 20 Moors, meaning black people, for the cost of one English servant. If we can do that, it will be more gainful pillage than you can imagine. And I just love that phrase, gainful pillage, because it pretty much represents our culture's approach to this continent. And whether we're talking about dispossessing native people so we could have the land, or whether we're talking about enslaving African people to work the land for us, and I say us, that wasn't a big thing in Maine, but New York was the second biggest slave port to Charleston in all of America until 1800. And it was a big thing down there. 1 out of every 5 people in the New York metropolitan area was enslaved until about 1800. So, and then the last thing is what we call natural resources that this country had so much of. If you think about that phrase, that very phrase, we say it and it's kind of this warm, fuzzy green feeling when you say it. Oh, we've got so many natural resources here. But what we're really saying is there's so much stuff here that we can take and sell, and that we can help ourselves to. And so that's what this next book is about, is just pointing out some big subsidies that this country is built on. And we want this book to come out before people start jumping on a soapbox celebrating 400 years of New Amsterdam, which was supposedly bought in 1626. And the same year is going to be 250 years after the Declaration of Independence. So there's going to be a lot of rah-rah stuff going on about what a great place this is, and we just want people to see the whole balance sheet as they're contemplating the last 4 centuries or the last 250 years.
All right, I'm going to open up. Sandy, yes.
So where did you figure Youngtown Road came, you figured where it came and went to, but why?
Well, I don't have a good explanation for point B yet, unless I don't know. Did Duck Trap ever get a grist mill? Did Duck Trap?
Yes.
When?
Corlin.
When did Duck Trap have a grist mill?
By 1790.
1790.
Okay, so before Molyneux in Camden, because he was like 1795, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So one possibility is people bringing corn or wheat up McGonagall Lake and by cart up to the grist mill here. Another possibility was that something was coming ashore at Duck Trap that was needed, in Camden, and it was easier to go. I have a hunch that a cart road and then you went across frozen water was what was going on with Youngtown Road. But I don't know. What's really hard is to see the economics of a particular time, and things like 100 years from now, if you try to explain to somebody, what your monthly expenses were, and they're like, what's this Hulu bill you pay, or what's this Verizon thing all about,
It's a phone.
Yeah. Someone else. Question.
Yeah.
Someone. Yes.
When you say the head of McGonagall Lake, my question, I guess, would be, when was McGonagall Lake formed? I mean, that's a dammed lake, is it not?
Yes, it's about a 13 or 14 foot dam.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, it was Long Pond and Kerry Pond, but you could go from roughly where Fernall's Neck Road is now, down to where we call the fish hatchery,
Right.
The outlet of McGonagall. So sleds in the winter could have gone that way. One other interesting thing about when the lake was frozen, if you go out picnicking around Land's End, there's a few ledges out there where picnic tables have been set up. Great spot to go swimming but if you look closely at those granite ledges, you will see the drill holes back when they drilled granite by holding the drill bit in one hand under a little torquing pressure, and as you struck it with the hammer, you twisted it a little more, and it popped out flakes of granite, and you worked your way down in and drilled a hole about that deep, and then put the feathers and wedges in, drove the wedge and split the granite. And you'd need one of those drill holes about that deep and about that diameter every 6 inches, is what they usually did. But if you ramble around the woods in Lincolnville, sometimes you'll find shut up, you. Sometimes you'll find drill holes 12 inches apart. And that's when you say, okay, this was somebody who really didn't even want to be doing this, you know. He wasn't making any money. He was getting granite for his own foundation. But seeing those drilled split granite remnants on the ledges at Land's End makes me think that there was probably a lot of sled traffic out on the lake in the winter, and whether Youngtown Road got people from Camden or Canaan up to Duck Trap, because it was quite a hub of industry up here. I was just saying at the start of the program tonight, if you go down to Duck Trap to have a little picnic, and you park, everyone knows where I'm talking about, right? You park right the end of the little road there, and you're right at the shore. If you start walking up the shore towards the Duck Trap condominiums, about 75 yards up, you'll see a great dugout ravine in the woods up to your right. And I believe that was a clay bank, and that all of the bricks that you see out on the Duck Trap clam flat, I think that clay bank supplied the brick making that happened at Duck Trap.
You think,
a lot of
Colin, you think he may be onto something here?
I think it may be, but there's still some clay there because I'm making bricks from them.
Oh, I know. And this winter storm really revealed that clay
No,
bank.
the clay was there last fall. I dug it last fall.
Oh no, I know. I'm just saying anyone can see it now. And but that great big gulf in the hillside, with a lot of broken bricks right at the drift line, makes me think that they got their clay right on site and burned
We actually know
it
the
there.
history of that. I can tell you afterwards.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna, 2 more questions. Yes,
Would you mind tracing the Native American route that you were talking about who came from the Duck Trap to Lincolnville to Youngstown Road?
Oh, I don't think that's necessarily Native American. It would be a long way to tote a canoe up Youngtown Road. I don't think you'd do
You couldn't
that.
trace any of the paths?
No, I don't have any confidence. I don't have any confidence that I know pre-contact paths in this area. Once that trading post went in on the Kennebec River at what's Augusta today,
Fort West.
a lot of the old paths make sense, because they had to get to those blankets and copper kettles and fire water and lead and gunpowder any time of year. So that's why roads converge on Augusta like the arms of a starfish.
Right, because I remember you saying Lime Rock Street in Rockland
Yes,
was an old.
was an
Native
old
American
road
path.
to Augusta.
Yeah.
Yes, but no, I don't have a clear enough vision of why, of what their need to travel cross lots would have been in pre-contact times.
Got it.
Travis.
I know there's been a lot made of the LiDAR that they've done in South America and in Europe, where they've peeled back the eras basically by flying over. Has any of that been done here?
Well, I have seen, the state used to make it very easy to get to a website that had LiDAR imagery of the whole state. they reshuffled the website and it's harder to find now. But basically, my belief is that the natural environment was so abundant here. It was so easy to make a living here as a Native American pre-contact that there was very little need for the terraforming that they do like in Central America. You know, there was no organized sort of mega spirituality here that I'm aware of. There was spirituality, but it was practiced at a small local unit. There wasn't, you know, there wasn't enough of a sedentary agricultural life here to have the numbers of people and the need, you know, for ritual killings.
It was too migratory.
Yeah, and I'm glad you used that word migratory rather than, you know, implying it was nomadic or pointless. They migrated between food resources as the season, you know.
Right. They stayed within a certain range for the most part, because the territory between the various tribes, there would have been competition, trade, what have you.
Yes.
But that didn't mean that they weren't moving around in their territory.
Right. Oh, no, totally that. And not only that, but alliances came and went. You know, sometimes you'd be fighting with somebody and it would get patched up and the two of you would fight against somebody else. And
you would have great chieftains of the various tribes emerge from time to time that would acquire influence or power for a certain set of time. All of those stories are lost.
It's just,
that's right.
just like today, like Lincolnville today, you know, you fight and then you patch it up and you know, that kind of thing. Kerry, thank you very much for coming and really round of applause for that. I want to mention there are all kinds of goodies back there, cookies and stuff.